You're listening to Puma Podcast.
On February 25, 2025, the Philippines will mark the 39th anniversary of the People Power Revolution, an uprising of around 2 million civilians who toppled the Marcos dictatorship without bloodshed. It will be the third anniversary commemorated under the presidency of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. The late dictator's son has declared the holiday a working one, a departure from its status under every other previous administration as a non-working day. In 2024, President Marcos chose not to declare it a holiday at all, and in 2023, he moved the date to February 24 and declared it a special working day. This year, dozens of private schools have chosen to either cancel classes on February 25 or hold commemorative events in lieu of regular classes. A consortium of schools in the EDSA Ortigas area, La Salle Green Hills, Xavier School, San Pedro Poveda College, and the Immaculate Conception Academy, released a statement affirming their commitment to keep the spirit of EDSA alive, despite, quote, efforts to undermine it, unquote. They end their statement by saying, "May we invite everyone to join us in remembering that the freedoms we enjoy today were hard won, and we owe it to the next generation that we protect and safeguard the same." Holidays are just one of many arenas where national debates about memory have raged for several years now. Monuments are another. Since President Marcos Jr. took office, at least 9 sites honoring members of his family, mostly his father, have sprouted up across the country. Around 5 more are in the process of being built. Researchers from the University of the Philippines Institute tracking these sites say at least 150 million pesos in public funds have been spent or allocated to build them.
The number of these sites that are popping up, it seems unprecedented, I think, at least looking at our recent history.
In this episode, I speak to one of the researchers tracking these monuments and ask him who's behind them, how and why they're being built, and what they might mean for a nation still grappling with the memory of a dictatorship. I'm Bella Perez Rubio, and you're listening to Teka Teka, powered by Puma Podcast.
I'm Miguel Paulo Reyes, currently University Research Associate dito sa Third World Studies Center.
The Third World Studies Center is part of UP, a research unit attached to its College of Social Sciences and Philosophy. It was established in the 70s to counter Marcos propaganda and broaden its scope after the EDSA revolution. But the last several years have seen the research center make a major return to its roots.
My research focus has been anything and everything, siguro, related to the Marcoses. Yeah. Although may particular focus din sa propaganda in favor of the Marcoses. One of my colleagues, who you know, Joel Ariate, sometime in maybe 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, he got the idea that we should start cataloging physical memorials honoring the Marcoses. And then in 2023, we decided to pick up where we left off in a way and maybe try to catalog all of the sites that we could identify based on an online search and looking through, for instance, guidebooks and similar publications dedicated to the Marcoses. I think we were able to identify at least 145 from Ilocos Norte. I think there's one in Palawan, a few in Quezon, several in here in the National Capital Region.
That figure, 145, covers monuments in Luzon as of 2023, many of them dating back to the dictatorship. Miguel says he and his colleagues visited nearly 100 of these sites in person.
So what we did for around 4 months, let's say, was it around June to September? In teams of at least 2, we visited these sites and we photographed them, we documented them. That's the extent of our research so far.
Which of these sites do you think are most notable or took you the most by surprise?
Maybe not by surprise, but of course, among the most striking for me personally were the actual statues or monuments as sculptural representations of the Marcoses. Before we tried to look for these, list down these sites, I only knew of maybe four or five, and most of them in Ilocos Norte. So I was surprised to find that there was a bust of Ferdinand Marcos in Antipolo, for one. Of course, there's one bust in the National Museum, and then there's one in Tarlac. So these are, of course, notable because these are, in a way, realistic representations of Ferdinand Marcos, depicting him as, well, someone worth making a statue of. And there were really more than I expected there to be. I think dozens, definitely. And that's counting only those in Luzon. Currently, we're trying to find out or list down the sites in Visayas and Mindanao and trying to acquire funding to visit those sites.
Under the Marcos administration, the team identified at least 9 sites completed with public funds. They include a grandstand and a police camp in San Juan, a marker for the Pantabangan Dam in Nueva Ecija, and the restoration of several Marcos mansions. But several more are either in construction or are set to be built with taxpayer money. One project already underway is the President Ferdinand E. Marcos Sr. Field at the Philippine National Police Academy in Silang, Cavite. Miguel's team found that the PNP's yearly budget allocates 100 million pesos to this project. The Department of Public Works and Highways will contribute another 10 million pesos to this fund. A groundbreaking ceremony was held for the field in July 2024. Senator Amy Marcos was the guest of honor. Media reported at the time that the structure would include a 2-story grandstand, a VIP room, and a large portrait or sculpture of Marcos Sr. Other projects include a 20 million peso revival of a hospital in Lamut, Ifugao, supposedly named after Ferdinand Marcos Sr., according to bills filed by members of the Marcos family in Congress, and a 9.5 million peso monument in Ilocos Sur that would honor the late dictator's debunked wartime heroics.
I think most of these, especially those I mentioned in the article, and even those that we found when we did fieldwork in 2023, were either drawn from local government budgets as allocated under the GAA or part of an agency's budget.
I wonder, is this an isolated case where this kind of thing just happens with the Marcos family specifically? Or do you also see like this sort of trend with other established political dynasties in the country, of which we have many?
Yeah, there are political dynasties do this. Of course, most of them are limited to their bailiwicks or their provinces. Of this scale, we're certain that the scale is national. We found at least one or two Marcos parks in Mindanao. Primarily, it seems in Ilocano enclaves in Mindanao, and of course in Leyte there are several. The hometown of the Romualdeses. For instance, we compared it with. It's not really systematic, but we also looked at the monuments or memorials or similar sites or structures named after the Aquinos. So we have several prominent Aquinos: Ninoy, Cory, Noynoy. I don't think there has been any structure named after Noynoy yet. Uh, Especially those that were built or constructed during the Noynoy's presidency. I don't think there were a lot. There was at least one Cory Aquino Hospital and one Cory Aquino Boulevard uh, built within 2010, 2016. And then before that, there were a few monuments. There's NHCP historical markers. And those are common, of course, for historical personages. There would be historical markers and monuments to historically significant persons in their hometowns. Of course, you go back even further. I think it was in the time of Gloria when her father, Diosdado Macapagal, was placed on the 200 peso bill. But again, I don't think there has been, in recent memory, something of this scale.
We'll pause here. Later, I asked Miguel what these monuments mean for the ongoing debate over how our country remembers the dictatorship and the movement that ended it. That brings us to what I think is at the heart of this discussion for me. People are probably familiar with, arguments around statues and memorializing certain people, certain events. But I think the average person, for example, will drive along EDSA and pass the EDSA monument and not really give much thought to what it means on an average day, if it even registers. You mentioned that your research had to do with physical structures and monuments. I think it's worth mentioning why that even matters in the first place.
One of the theoretical handles that we try to integrate in our research is memory studies, which you can summarize as the main concern is who remembers what for whom, who makes these, who, for instance, creates these sites of memories and for what reason. We've thus far, specifically regarding this research, we've thus far only cataloged these sites, found, identified where they are. We haven't really looked much into who had them built and what was the purpose, but we do have some preliminary ideas. For instance, in Ilocos Norte, it really seems it seems obvious that they are trying to reinforce their hold in the province, both them and local political leaders, many of whom are also related to the Marcoses. So that seems to be one reason why there's all of these Marcos sites in Ilocos Norte. And then there are these sites that are related to the military, our security agencies, so the military, the police. And it seems that these sites are, or these memorials are trying to reinforce a connection between the Marcoses and the military. Supposedly, our greatest war hero, uh, history. But besides that, someone who, while he was president, helped the military develop in such a way that we were supposedly, based on some propaganda purveyors, our military during the Marcos era was unparalleled. But there's that attempt to reinforce the Marcoses being benefactors of the military. So we can't really discount the effect of Ferdinand Marcos being buried in the libingan ng mga bayani, which was among the sites that our team visited, in altering or reinforcing the favorable image of the Marcoses.
I think about the Black Lives Matter movement in the States and how one of the conversations happening around that in 2020 was, these monuments of people on the wrong side of the Civil War. And one of the main arguments that um, people who supported those statues still existing and continuing to be where they are is them being there is not an endorsement of the things they did wrong. It's just us acknowledging our history. It happened, and these people existed, and they were lauded for a time. What do you say to that argument?
At least in our context, we tried to classify the sites some based on their messaging of sorts. For instance, some of them are very clearly inclined toward creating a favorable image of the Marcoses to the extent that they try to, or they really do reinforce falsities about the Marcoses. Then there are sites that are more neutral. For instance, the Presidential Museum is supposed to showcase all of the presidents and their achievements. So, in a way, that's neutral. And you cannot remove Ferdinand Marcos if you're going to show the history of the Philippines through its presidents. Nevertheless, if you portray them in a very neutral way, for instance, you just highlight the Marcos administration's infrastructural achievements, of course, you downplay, as a result, all of the abuses, all of the theft, all of the plunder that attended the Marcos senior administration. So, in general, even if a site is neutral, our impression based on what we found is they do tend to make the Marcoses seem more, uh, how do I say this, uh, better than they were.
You named a lot of sites where it overtly rewrites history, right? Some sites are clearly not neutral in that sense that they're trying to give a false account of what actually happened. But my question is, can a monument ever be neutral?
So again, you'll have to look into motivations, reasons, the purpose for why a monument was constructed in the first place. And of course, these there are people behind these monuments. They have reasons for building these monuments, and they are never neutral.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka. I'm Bella Perez Rubio. This episode was edited by Anthony Tobias. If you'd like to hear more stories like this one, we have other episodes tackling how we remember the dictatorship at this peculiar point in history. We'll leave those links for you in the show notes. And if you'd like to support this kind of reporting, why not share this story with a friend or two and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.